Hi everybody, welcome to Live Blogger. I have combined all the videos in the BMR Calculator series into this single long video so that it's easy for you to follow. Now in this video, we are basically creating this BMR Calculator from scratch using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. And here we can see we have these input fields, and if I click on calculate, we can see that the BMR is calculated over here. So this is basically what we're going to design in this video. And in the end, I will also show you how to add this to your Blogger website. And I will also leave the link of the source code in the description, so you can just go ahead and copy and paste the code to your websites. So let's get started. Now if you want to know what is BMR and how it is calculated, you can go to this website called calculator.net and you can search for BMR Calculator. You can find all the information about BMR over here. But in this video, we will start designing this from scratch using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. And here we can see we have these input fields. We have the age, the gender, the height, the weight. And you can go ahead and change these values and just click on calculate. And it will display the number of calories per day over here. So let's change something over here. Let's change this to 25. And now let's click on calculate. And we can see that the number has changed. And now if we select female and click on calculate, we can see that we have a different result over here. So we use a formula to calculate this BMR, and we get all these input field values and just calculate it based on the formula. And we'll do that using JavaScript. Right, so here I have created this folder called BMR Calculator, and I just opened it with VS Code. So first of all, let's go ahead and create all the necessary files. So let's click on new file and we'll create an HTML file. I'll just name it index.html. And we also need to have a CSS file. Let's name it style.css. And we'll also create a JavaScript file. I'll just name it main.js. Let's start with the index.html file. Now in VS Code, you have this shortcut where you can just press exclamation and press tab, and you will have this basic HTML5 code. And let's link our CSS file over here. So I'll just type link and press tab, and in the href I'll just type style.css, and in the body I'll just link the JavaScript file. So let's type script:/src and press tab, and here I'll just type main.js. Alright, let's start by creating a container division to hold everything. So let's create a division with the class of BMR Calculator. And in that we will have two sections. One is this controls section and the next is this results section. So let's create a division with the class of controls. And before that, let's create an h2 for the heading. So let's type BMR Calculator. And now let's open this in our browser. So I have this extension called Live Server installed in VS Code. So once you install that, you can just right click over here in the HTML and click on Open with Live Server. And now we can see we have the heading displayed over here. Let's go ahead and write the HTML for all the other elements. So inside the controls division, let's create a form, and in that we will have all the input fields. And here first of all we will have the heading for the age. So let's type S3 and let's type age over here, and below that we will have the input field. So let's type input, and we will keep the type to text, and we will set the ID to age, and we'll also have a default value. We'll set it to 28 by default. And if you go back to the website, we can see that we have the heading and also the input field. Right now let's create another heading for gender. So let's create an S3, and I'll just type gender over here. And here we can see in gender we have two radio buttons. So I'll just add this inside a division. So let's create a division with the class of gender, and in that we will add the S3. And here let's go ahead and create an input field, and we'll set the type to radio, and we will set the ID to male, and we'll also set the value to male. And now let's create a label, and this label is for this ID male. So here inside for I'll just type male, and here inside the label I'll just type male. So if you go back to our design, here we can see we have this male radio button, and if I click on this label, we can see that the radio button is active. Right now let's copy both these lines of code and let's paste it down here. And the second one is for female. So I'll just select male from here and I'll just change this to female, and here also I'll just type female. And now we can see there are two radio buttons. One is for male and the other is for female. And if I click on male, we have the first radio button active, and if I click on female, we have the second one active. But here we have a problem. We just need to have one of these options checked at one time. So what we need to do is we need to add a name attribute to both these input fields. So here I'll just type name, and I'll just give it a value of gender. Now we have to add the same name to the other input field as well. So here I'll just type name equals gender. And now if we go back to our design, and if I click on one of these options, we have it selected, and if I click on the other option, we have the other one selected, and we have just one selected at a time. And now the next thing we will do is we will have the male option selected by default. So if I just refresh this page, we can see that none of these are selected. So here I just add an attribute checked, and now we can see that the male option is selected by default. Right now let's move on to the next input field, which is height. So let's create an S3, and I'll just type height over here, and let's create an input field, and we'll keep the type to text. I'll just add an ID of height, and we'll set a value by default, and I'll just set it to 180. And here we can see in front of this input field, we also have centimeters written over here. So for that we need to add one more division. So let's create a division with the class of unit, and here I'll just type cm for centimeter, and we will include all of this inside a division. So let's create a division with the class of height, and I'll just include all of this inside this division. Right now the next thing we will do is create the input field for the weight. So let's create a division with the class of weight, and in that we will have an S3 with the text of weight, and then we'll have an input field with the type of text and ID of weight, and we'll also add a value, and we'll set the value to 65 by default. And here we can see we have this unit kg. So let's create a division with the class of unit, and here I'll just type kg. And if you go back to our design, here we can see we have all these elements displayed over here. Right now let's go ahead and create the calculate button. So let's go outside this controls division. So I'll just go outside over here, and let's create a division with the class of result. And in that the first thing we will have is this button. So let's create a button, and we will give it a class of calculate button. And here I'll just type calculate. And then we need to have this result displayed over here. So we'll create a division with the class of result message, and in that we will type, the first thing is the value, and then we have calories per day. And if you take a look at this, we can see that we have a different styling for this number. So let's add this inside a span so that we can style it differently. So I'll just type span, and I'll just give it a class of calories, and I'll just cut this ending tag and paste it after this number. Right now let's go back to our design, and this is how it looks. We have all the elements displayed over here. So that's basically it with the HTML. Right here I'm in the source code of our design, and here we have already linked our CSS file over here. So let's go to our style.css file, and let's get started with the design. Now the first thing we will do is we will style the container division. So for the container division we have a division with the class of BMR Calculator. So let's go back to our style.css file, and let's type .bmr calculator, and let's set a max width of 300 pixels, and we will set the font family to Roboto and sans serif, and we'll also set a padding of 8 pixels top and bottom and 24 pixels left and right, and we'll also add a box shadow, and we'll set the values to 0, 4 pixels, 8 pixels, negative 3 pixels, RGBA, 0, 0, 0 and 0.3, and this is how it looks right now. Now we'll also add a line of code called box sizing and set it to border box so that we have the correct height and width for the elements. So let's type BMR calculator, and we'll also select all the elements inside this BMR calculator division. So let's type comma and BMR calculator and asterisk. So this will select all the elements inside this class, and let's set the box sizing to border box. Right now the first thing we will style is this heading. So for the heading we have an H2. So here we can see we have this H2. So let's style that. Here I'll just type BMR calculator H2, and let's set the text align to center, and we will set a background color of dark gray, and we'll set the color of the text to white, and let's set the font weight to 100. And now if we go back to the original design, we can see that we have this heading spanning across this container division. So here, if I just add a background color, we can see this is the width of this container division, which is BMR Calculator, and we want this heading to have the same width. So for that we can add a negative margin. So let's type margin, and here we can see we have added a padding of 8 pixels and 24 pixels. So we have to add a margin of negative 8 pixels and negative 24 pixels. And now we can see it is having the same width as the container division. Right now let's add a margin bottom, and let's set it to 8 pixels. And let's also add a padding, and let's set it to 16 pixels. Right now let's remove this background color. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to style all these headings. Now for those headings we have an S3. So here we can see inside the form we have this S3 for age, gender, and so on. So let's target the S3. I'll just type BMR Calculator, and it is inside the form, so I'll just type form S3, and let's set the font size to 15 pixels, and let's set text transform to uppercase, and we'll also set a margin of 16 pixels top, 0 for right, and 10 pixels bottom, and 0 for left. Now the next thing we will style is these input fields. So the input fields are inside this form, and we have this input field with the type of text. So let's target that. Here I'll just type BMR Calculator, form input with the type of text. And first of all, let's set a width of 100%, and we will add a padding of 4 pixels top and bottom, and 16 pixels left and right. And let's set the font size to 24 pixels, and we'll set the font weight to bold, and we'll also change the border. So I'll just type border, and let's set it to 1 pixel solid, and for the color we will set it to D5 dB DD. Now let's add a little bit of gap between all these elements. So we will target the form. So let's type BMR Calculator, form, and let's set the display to flex, and we'll set the flex direction to column, and we will add a gap of 4 pixels. Right now let's add a left margin for the second radio button. So if you go back to our HTML, here we can see for the second radio button we have an ID of female. So let's type BMR Calculator, form female, and let's set a margin left of 20 pixels. Right now let's style these units. We have centimeter and kg written over here. It should be positioned at the right side over here. So here we can see we have these units displayed over here at the right. Now if you go back to our HTML file, here we can see we have this division with the class of height, and in that we have this unit. So we'll position the unit relative to this height, and we will position this unit relative to this weight. So first of all, let's add position of relative to height and weight. So let's type BMR Calculator, form height, and BMR Calculator, form weight, and let's set the position to relative. And now let's position these units, and for the units we have a division with the class of unit. So let's type BMR Calculator, form unit, and let's set the position to absolute, and we'll set the right position to 20 pixels, and we'll set the top position to 50 pixels, and let's set the color of the text to 777. So that's it with the units. Now let's style this button. Now if you go back to the HTML file, here we can see we have this button with the class of calculate button, and it is inside this result division. So let's type BMR Calculator, result calculate button, and let's set a padding of 8 pixels top and bottom, 24 pixels left and right, And we'll set a margin of 16 pixels top and bottom and 0 for left and right. And let's set the font size to 18 pixels. And we'll set the font weight to 100. And let's set the text transform to uppercase. And let's set the border to none. And we will add a background color. And I will set it to 333. And we'll set the color of the text to white. And we'll set the cursor to pointer. And we'll also bring it to the center. Now we have to bring both these elements to the center. We have to bring the button and also this result message. Now both of them are inside this result division over here. So let's target that. Let's type BMR Calculator result. And let's type text align, set it to center. And let's set the color of the text. So let's type color. And let's set it to 4E, 4E, 4E. And let's set the font size to, let's try 18 pixels. And now let's style this number. So for the number we have a different styling over here. So if you go back to the index.html file, here we can see for the number we have created a span and we have given it a class of calories. So let's target this. So here I'll just type BMR Calculator result calories. And let's set the color of the text to green. And let's set the font size to 38 pixels. And let's set the font weight to 900. And we'll also add some margin right. So let's type margin right. And we will set it to 8 pixels. And if you want to bring both of these to the center vertically, you can just add a line of code which is vertical align and set it to middle. Right now let's add some gap between this button and this result message. So for the button, let's add a margin bottom. And let's set it to, let's try 32 pixels. And that looks alright. So that's basically it with the styling of our BMR calculator. And with that we have completed the CSS of this design. Right, this is our source code, and if you go to the index.html file, here we can see we have already linked our main.js file. Now the first thing we need to do is we need to reference some of these elements from the HTML into our JavaScript file. So we need to reference the calories span over here because we need to update this value. And we need to reference the calculate button. And then we need to reference all these input fields. We need to reference the weight, the height, the gender, and the age. And for all these elements we have these IDs and classes. So for the input fields we have this ID of age, and for the radio buttons we have a name of gender for both these radio buttons, and then we have an ID of height for the height, and then we have an ID of weight for the weight input field, and then we have this calculate button class for the button, and then we have this class called calories. So let's reference all of these in our JavaScript. Let's go to the main.js file. So let's type const calories equals document.querySelector BMR Calculator, and in that we have the result, and in the result we have the calories. And now let's reference the button. So let's type const calculate button equals document.querySelector BMR Calculator result calculate button. Right now let's reference the age. So let's type const age equals document.querySelector BMR Calculator form, and we have an ID of age, and then we have the gender, but we need to get one of these values from here. So we will get the values when we click on this calculate button. So we will do that later. For now let's reference this height. So let's type const height equals document.querySelector BMR Calculator form hash height, and then lastly we have the weight. So let's type const weight equals document.querySelector BMR Calculator form weight. Right now let's create a function to calculate the BMR. Now for the BMR we are using a formula which goes like this: BMR equals 10 times weight plus 6.25 times height minus 5 times age plus 5. So this is the formula that we're going to use for the male, and for the female we're going to use this formula. BMR equals 10 times weight plus 6.25 times height minus 5 times age minus 161. So this is the formula. Now let's create a function to calculate this formula. So we'll create a function called calculate BMR. Now in this function we're going to receive some arguments over here. So we're going to receive the weight, we're going to receive the height, we're going to receive the age, and we're going to also receive the gender. Right now let's add an if condition over here. So let's type if gender equals male. Then we're going to return this value right here, and I'll just copy this from here and paste it over here. Now if it is a male, then we're going to return this value right here, or else we're going to return a slightly different value, which is this one right here. So let's copy this and let's paste it over here. Alright, now the last thing we need to do is we need to add an event listener to this calculate button, and we need to call this function calculate BMR. So let's type calculate button dot add event listener, and we will listen for the click event, and let's create an arrow function over here, and here we need to call the function calculate BMR, and we need to pass the values of these input fields. Now if we scroll up, we can see that we have these constants over here. We have the age, height, and weight, but these are the elements. Now to get the value we need to add dot value. So here first of all we need to get the weight. So let's type weight dot value, and then we need to have the height. So let's type height dot value, and then we have the age. So let's type age dot value, and then we need to have the gender. So let's get the gender first of all. So here let's create a variable called gender value equals document dot query selector, and he will just type BMR Calculator form, and here we need to type input, and for the input field we have a name. So here we can see we have a name of gender for both these input fields. So let's type name equals gender, and then we need to get the value of the checked input field. So right now male is checked, so here we can just type colon checked, and here we need to type dot value. So this will store the value of whichever of these radio input fields are selected and store it inside this value gender value, and here we will pass the value. So just type gender value. Now this function will return to us a value. So let's get the value over here. Let's store it inside a variable. So let's type let BMR equals, and we will get the value from this function and we'll store it inside this variable. Now let's display this variable inside this calories division right here. So we have already referenced that over here, calories. So let's type calories dot inner HTML equals BMR. Right now let's test and see whether this works. So let's change some of these values. Let's change this to 25. Let's change this to, let's say, 80, and let's click on calculate, and here we can see we have this value displayed over here. And if I select female, let's click on calculate, and we have a different value, and let's see whether we have the correct value displayed over here. So let's add these same input values into our original design. So we have 25, female, 180, and 80, and let's click on calculate, and we have 1639, and here also we have 1639. Now the last thing we need to do is we need to add this comma after this first value, because for the number we have a different format, so we don't have the comma displayed over here. Now you can do that easily using a function called toLocalString, and here we need to pass en-us, and now let's save this, and now let's add some values, and let's click on calculate, and we have the comma and everything is working all right. So that's basically how you can add functionality to this BMR calculator using JavaScript. So now if I just add some random letters over here, and if I click on calculate, we can see that we have this not a number displayed over here. Now we don't want this to happen. We don't want to calculate the BMR when we don't have a valid input. So when we have an invalid input, we want to display a message over here, an error message, and we'll also highlight the input field so that the user knows which is the invalid input. And even if we have a blank input field and if I click on calculate, the BMR should not be calculated because we don't have a value over here. So for that we need to add input validation. Now let me show you a demo of what we're going to design. So now here we can see we have these input fields over here, and if I just delete this value from here and if I click on calculate, we can see that we have this input field highlighted over here and we have this error message. Please enter all the details correctly. And if I just add some random value over here and if I click on calculate, we can see we still have this highlight for the input field and also this error message. But if you have a valid input, you can just type that over here. So if I just type 30 and if I click on calculate, we can see that the error message is gone and now we have the BMR calculated over here. The same goes with these two input fields over here. So if I just add some invalid input and if I click on calculate, we can see that the BMR is not calculated and we have this error message and we also have this input field highlighted. And if I just remove all the values and if I click on calculate, we still have this error message. So this is what we're going to do in this video. Let's get started. Alright, this is the source code of our design and let's scroll down in the HTML. And the first thing we will do is we'll create this error message. So let's create a division over here inside the results division. So I'll just create a division with the class of error message. And here we'll just create a paragraph and let's type please enter all the details correctly. Right, now we can see here we have this division displayed over here. Now let's style it using CSS. So let's go to a style.css file and let's target the error message division. So let's type BMR Calculator result error message and let's set the color of the text to red and let's set the font size to 14 pixels and we'll set the display to none by default. So let's type display of none. So at the beginning the error message will not be displayed, but when we have some invalid input then we will display the error message. So we'll create a class called active for that. So let's type BMR Calculator result error message dot active. So when we have the active class added to the error message, then we will set the display to block. Now for the invalid input we need to have a different border. So let's scroll up and let's go to the input field. So this is the selector for the input field. So here I just type BMR Calculator form input of type text and we'll create a class called invalid. And when we have the invalid class, we will set the border to 1 pixel solid red. Alright, now let's go to our JavaScript file and let's add the code for the input validation. Now the first thing we will do is we will set the color of the border of these input fields to red if we have an invalid input. So let's scroll down and let's target the age. So for the age we have this constant with a name of age and then we have height and weight also. So let's create a comment. I'll just type input validation and let's type age dot add event listener and we will listen for an event called input. Now this event will be fired whenever we add or remove any of these numbers. So in here let's create an arrow function and we need to get the value of this input field. So we'll get it over here. I'll just name it E. You can name this anything you want. And the first thing we will do is we will test whether the values are being displayed. So let's just add a console.log and let's type e.target.value. So this will give us the value. So I'll just right click over here and click on inspect and this is our console. So let's remove 8 from here and now we can see we have the value of the input field displayed over here. Now if I just type 3 over here, we can see that we have 23 displayed over here because that's the value inside this input field. Now if you don't have any number over here, we have this blank value displayed over here. Right now we know that the event listener is working alright. So let's remove this line of code and we will add a variable. So let's type let age value and we'll set it to the value. So let's type e.target.value and let's add an if condition. And the first thing we will do is we will check whether we have any values inside this. So we have this variable called age value, and in that we have the value of the input field. So let's type exclamation age value. Now this will check whether we have any value inside this age value variable. And let's add an OR over here, and we'll also check whether this value is not a number. So for that we can use a function called isNaN, and here I'll just type age value. And now let's add one more OR, and we will set a limit for the age. So let's type age value, and we will set it to be greater than 10. So let's type less than 10 over here. Now when the value of the age is less than 10, then whatever we have in this if condition will be executed. And now let's add one more OR, and we will set a max limit. So I'll just type age value, and I'll just set the max limit to 100. You can set it to whatever you want. And let's add this block over here. Now what we need to do over here is that we need to add this class called invalid to the input field. So let's type age.classList.add, and here I'll just type invalid. Now if any of these conditions is not true, then we will add the code inside the else. So let's type else, and we'll just remove the invalid class. So let's type age.classList.remove invalid. Right, now let's test whether this works. So let's remove these values from here, and now we can see we have this border around the input field. Now if I just add some value over here, we can see that the border is gone. Now if we add a number below 10, so let's type 8. Now we can see we have this red border, and if you have a number greater than 100, here we can see we still have the border. And if you have a valid input, so let's type 26, and now we can see we don't have any problems. Now let's add a character, so let's type some characters over here, and now we can see it says that we have an invalid input. So let's do the same with all the other input fields over here. Now the code for the other input fields are almost the same, so let's copy this and let's paste it down here 2 more times. And for this one, let's type height. Let's select all of these and let's type height over here. And for the height, we don't need to have this upper limit, so I'll just set the height to be greater than 0. We'll just check whether we have a positive number. Now in the same way, let's go ahead and change this to weight. And let's remove this upper limit from here and let's set it to 0. And now let's check whether this works. So let's change this to some alphabets, and now we can see we have this border, and this is also working all right. Let's check the weight. Let's type -10, and now we can see we have this invalid input. Let's type some positive value, so let's type 30, and now we don't have any problems. Let's set it to blank, and we have this invalid input border. Now when we have invalid input for any of these input fields, we need to display the error message over here. So let's scroll up and let's go to the calculate function over here. So here we have the calculate function, or let's go inside the calculate event listener, and here we will add an if condition, and we'll check whether we have invalid class added to any of these input fields. So let's type if age.classList.contains invalid, or height.classList.contains invalid, or weight.classList.contains invalid. Now if we have invalid class in any of these input fields, we will display the error message. So for the error message, we have a class called active. So let's add the active class. So first of all, let's reference the error message. So here I'll just type const error message equals document.querySelector BMR Calculator result error message, and let's scroll down, and here we'll just type error message .classList.add active, and we'll also type return over here so that the rest of the code will not be executed. Right now let's check whether this works. So let's add an invalid input, and let's click on calculate. And here we can see we have the error message displayed over here, and we also have this input field highlighted. And if I just add a valid input and if I click on calculate, we have the calculated BMR over here. But when we have a valid input, we need to hide this error message. So what I will do is, after this if condition, I'll just type error message dot class list dot remove, and here just type active, and this will remove the active class by default. So let's add an invalid input. Let's click on calculate, and we have this error message. And if I remove the invalid input and if I just add a valid input and click on calculate, the error message is hidden. So everything is working alright. Let's check the height and the weight. So let's add some invalid input over here, and let's click on calculate, and we have this error message. And let's add a valid input, and now let's click on calculate, and now we don't have any error message over here. So that's basically it with the input validation of our BMR calculator. Right here I'm in the dashboard of my Blogger website, and you can go ahead and add the BMR calculator to a post or a page. Let's add it inside a post. So let's click on new post, and let's add a title over here. So I'll just type BMR calculator. And now the next thing you need to do is you have to go into the HTML view. So by default it will be in the compose view. So just click on this button and click on HTML view, and here you have to add the HTML, the CSS and the JavaScript. So let's go ahead and add the code over here. So first of all, let's add the CSS. So I'll just create a style tag over here, and in this style tag we will add the CSS. So let's go to our source code, and I will leave the link of the source code in the description. So let's go to the style.css file, and let's copy all of this from here, and let's paste it over here inside the style tag. And now let's add the HTML. So let's go outside the style tag, and now let's go to the source code, and let's go to the index.html file, and let's copy everything inside the body. So let's copy everything from here till here, and let's paste it inside the Blogger post. And now let's add the JavaScript. So let's create a script tag over here, and let's go back to our source code, and let's go to the main.js file, and let's copy everything from here, and let's paste it over here inside the script tag. Now if you scroll up, we can see that you can go ahead and change these details over here. So here we can see this is the heading. You can change the heading, and you can change all these headings over here. And here we have the error message, so you can go ahead and customize the error message over here. And if you want to change the look of the BMR calculator, you have all the CSS over here. You can go ahead and change all of these CSS code. Alright, now let's click on publish and confirm. Alright, now here we can see the post has been published. So let's click on view post, and here we can see our BMR calculator displayed, and we have everything displayed correctly. Let's see whether this works. So let's click on female, and let's click on calculate, and we can see that the BMR is calculated over here. Now we have a slight problem in the CSS. We don't have enough padding at the bottom. So if I right click over here and click on inspect, and if we go to the main division, which is BMR calculator, you can just add a padding bottom. So if I just type padding bottom of 20 pixels, I think that looks alright. So let's add this. Let's go back to our post, and here we can see this is the selector. So here I'll just type padding bottom and set it to 20 pixels, and let's update it, and let's go back to our post, and let's refresh this page. And now we can see we have the padding and everything looks alright. Let's see whether the error message is displayed. So let's add some invalid input, and let's click on calculate, and we have the error message displayed over here. So everything works alright. So that's basically how you add a BMR calculator to your Blogger website. Now I will leave the link of the source code in the description, so you can go ahead and copy and paste the code to your website. So that's basically it for this video. If you have any doubts, you can ask in the comments below. And if you like this video, please click on the like button and subscribe to this channel to get the latest video updates. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a nice day.